guys, welcome back to Read Instead. I'm Jake. Glad to be with you today. So this will be a rather late October wrap-up. What happened was I made this video about 2 or 3 days ago, and unfortunately when I transferred it over to my laptop, I realized that there was no sound, there was no audio. And right before I'm making this video, I just tested out my wireless mic, and for whatever reason it's not working and I can't seem to get it to work. So maybe it's time for a new one. And this might be a blessing to some of you out there, because I have seen in the comments before that sometimes that microphone is turned up a little too high and it's a little too intense. So I apologize for the audio today, but I can assure you that it's better than being completely mute. I wanted to take this opportunity to wrap up the month of October, just go over what I read, and I'm going to pick out my book of the month for the month of October. So let's talk about it. Okay, so if you guys can remember, I did a review of this book. This is Disillusioned by C.J. Sansom, and I read this at the beginning of the month of October. A detective murder investigative story that takes place in 1500s England. A hunchbacked detective slash attorney that works for the government is Cromwell's sort of right-hand man, or a man that can get stuff done for him, and he's sent down to an abbey, a monastery, where a murder takes place. Another government worker had been sent down there to do sort of like a financial audit of the place, and he ended up decapitated in the place. So that's why Matthew Shardlake, the detective in this story and in this series, gets sent down there. As I mentioned in the review of this book, I read this at a pretty busy time, and most of the reading sessions that I had with this book were pretty short, and I think that sort of can contribute to the lack of sort of immersion for me into the story. Looking back at it now, this wasn't a bad novel at all. I did enjoy it. It just it didn't move me so much, but again, I think that was just from my particular set of circumstances at the time. I can't even remember what was going on, but I did happen to go through sort of, I just had a busy week, the week that I read this. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars on Goodreads, but this is what I will say. There's 7 books in this series, and I will continue to read on. I will pick up the second book at some point, probably next year sometime. So I hope that, sort of shows that this certainly wasn't a dud for me. I enjoyed it, and I look forward to maybe enjoying the second book a little more than this one. Okay, book number 2 that I read in the month of October, Swan Song by Robert McCammon. And this book was awesome. It's like 900 pages, and I just remember very specifically that it felt like it was 400 pages, and I could have, this book could have been 300, 400 pages longer, and I would have enjoyed it all the same. It didn't seem to drag. Post-apocalyptic, after, nuclear war takes place, you have sort of these random characters throughout the United States that find their narratives and their storylines start to sort of intertwine with each other. There are some fantasy elements to this. It's very realistic in the sense, like what would post-nuclear war America, what would it look like, how people would act. I think it would bring out, survival of the fittest, those sort of instincts, those killer instincts. No laws, no police anymore, no government. It's just everybody to fend for themselves, and it was certainly an intense tale of survival. But the fantasy elements in this story were just really, really cool. The character Swan, the main character, this 11-year-old girl who, it takes us through about a 7-year period. So she starts out at about 10 or 11, and then she, by the end of the novel, she's, 17, 18 years old, and just a really cool premise. And how it ends up is It was really rewarding. It resolved everything. All the characters were intriguing and entertaining. So that was book number 2 for me in the month of October. Swan Song by Robert McCammon. Okay, book number 3 that I read during the month of October, Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. And if you guys checked out my review of this book really moved me. I connected with Charles Frazier's writing immensely. It was awesome. Very few characters in this book. It's a Civil War saga. It's labeled as a romance saga. I would personally call it more a tale of survival. Pretty simple, the synopsis. You have a man and a woman who sort of have a very brief encounter right before the man is called off into the Civil War. It takes place in the southern United States, so on the Confederate side of the Civil War. The novel opens up, and the man decides to leave and desert and head back to his homeland, which is Cold Mountain. And in the back of his mind, the real reason why he's being pushed to head back to Cold Mountain is because he wants to rekindle this relationship that he had, this brief relationship that he had with this woman. But he's hopeful, even though he's been extremely scarred and changed by what he has experienced in war. And on the other side, you have this woman's tale of survival. The novel opens up with her, and she loses her father, and it was really just her and her father for her entire life. And she's left with this house and this property and sort of this cropland, and she doesn't really know what to do with it because she doesn't have much experience doing that, and it's, you know, her tale of survival as well. More than anything, though, the reason why this novel will stick with me for, I think, forever, that's what it feels like now, and the reason why I gave it 5 stars is because Charles Frazier's writing is just so romantic, I guess is the way to put it, but not sort of in a love type of way. It's just very moving, and I remember, I'm just thinking right now as I explain this, I remember there's a scene in this when Eamon, that's the man, the sort of the main character in this book, he is, you know, walking, he's basically trekking across, you know, it seems like hundreds of miles to get back to Cold Mountain, and he's alone in the woods on a particular night, and he lays down and puts his head back to fall asleep. He probably hasn't eaten in a number of days, just barely hanging on by a thread. He has numerous injuries and wounds all over his body. And I remember Charles Frazier describes it. He's looking up into the trees, and he sees the crows. The crows are you know, moving about the trees above him, and they're talking to one another, as you can hear on any given day how birds talk to one another. And Inman, the man, starts to think that the crows are mocking him, his situation, and it's almost like they, for that time being right there, they were like the dominant species because they were a lot more well off than he was. That's just one very small example. I mean, there's 100 other examples like that where Charles Frazier just uses this sort of an analogy and these metaphors to paint a picture of survival. That's what it comes down to. That's what this book was to me. So I really love this. Again, I gave it 5 stars. Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier was the 3rd book that I read in the month of October. And last but not least, the 4th book that I read during the month of October is Trunk Music by Michael Connelly. This is the Harry Bosch detective series, the Los Angeles homicide detective. I believe this is the 5th book in the series, and Michael Connelly has never failed me yet. I've enjoyed every one of his novels. I enjoyed this one as well. At the beginning of the novel, there is an abandoned car on sort of an overlook canyon kind of thing in LA, and it's discovered that a body is inside the trunk with 2 bullets in the back of his head. As the story progresses, Harry Bosch starts to unravel and uncover a predicament that this guy was sort of tied in with some mob figures out of Las Vegas, and he was sort of in a money laundering. He had a money laundering business going on. There's so many twists and turns in this. I guess that's why I liked it. You know, that's what stuck out to me the most. I remember there was a scene in this where you think that they arrest a guy out of kind of a mob underling out of Las Vegas. They extradite him back to LA. And all the evidence points to this guy. The only reason why you as the reader you would think that something's about to happen is because it only happens like at the halfway point or maybe a 60% mark in this book. So you're like, well, this can't be the guy. Just like when you're watching a movie and you know a detective movie and they arrest the guy and it seems like they're about to pin the crime on him, but you're only 50 minutes into the movie and you're like, well, something's about to happen because it wouldn't make sense that this would be the end of it. Anyway, they bring this guy back to LA and they, again, all the evidence points to him. And then, lo and behold, Harry Bosch gets called into an office down the street at this other building where sort of the top brass of the LA Police Department, where their headquarters is, and he gets called into this room and he notices that there's FBI agents in there, and they ask him to sit down. He's like, oh, what do they do now, kind of thing. And the next thing you know is that this guy that they just arrested kind of just walks in from the door into the office. And it turns out that the guy that they arrested was an undercover FBI agent, and he had been undercover for 4 or 5 years. That was probably the biggest twist, and it really was entertaining. If I can say one negative thing about this book, it's not really so much about the book. Again, this is the 5th book that I've read in this series, and every book so far, just about, like the last book, it's called The Last Coyote, the one that I read before this, which I probably enjoyed just a little bit more than this one. He was seeing a police psychiatrist because he had been ordered to do that. What I'm saying is, in every one of these novels, Harry Bosch is always in some sort of he's always butting heads with his superiors and the internal affairs division, and it's like they have it out for him. And I just felt like it was becoming like a little redundant. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? I don't know. I know nothing about human resources department or the inner workings of police departments or anything like that. But if a guy is constantly getting suspended, and then he gets ordered to go see psychiatrists, and then he's always butting heads with his superiors, and I'm like saying to myself, would they still be in the police department? I don't know. Maybe not. I guess if you're a really good detective and you're solving a bunch of homicides, then they'll let some things sort of skate by. But that's the only negative thing that I have about this. But plenty of twists and turns that I didn't see coming. It takes you all the way to the very end of the novel, where the twists and turns keep happening, and it finally sort of resolves itself in a very entertaining way. So that was the last book, number 4, that I read during the month of October. Okay, so when it comes to the book of the month for me, it came down to 2 out of those 4 books that I just mentioned to you guys. It was pretty difficult, but not too difficult at the same time. One was very entertaining while I read it, and it was certainly a ride and sort of like an adrenaline rush, and I was certainly always coming back to the novel, and when I was away from it, I was thinking about it and I wanted to get back to it. I was really tied to the characters, and I was invested in them and I cared about them. But there's only one book that I think is going to sit with me forever. And it's certainly going to be at the end of this year, 2024, I will make a top 10 books that I read during this year. And this book will certainly be on it. Matter of fact, maybe both of those books will be on it, but one of these for sure. So without further ado, my book of the month for October 2024 is Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. Again, I'm not going to talk about it too much more. I just really enjoyed this book. It's going to sit with me for a long time. One more thing, if I could just add to it. I've talked a little bit before about how I think sometimes an author can put prose in the way that they write and really painting a picture with words, as priority number one. And there's nothing wrong with that, but if the plot takes such a way back seat to that, that's when I start to not care so much about the lofty prose and the literary techniques and stuff like that, whatever you want to call it, the beautiful writing, okay? Charles Frazier did not do that. His prose and his writing is beautiful, and it moved me a lot, but it didn't do that, in spite of the plot. It didn't replace the plot. In this was still very engaging, and there's like a storyline that really it continues on throughout the book, and and you're rooting for these characters, and you're invested in them. So it had everything to me that makes a great novel. So book of the month for me, Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. Okay, and lastly, what am I reading? What am I going to next? As I mentioned to you guys before in a video, I did a channel reading update video maybe a month and a half ago or something like that, where I talked about 8 or 9 books that I want to get in before the end of this year. This book was on there. This is called Wrath by John Gwynne. It's the 4th book in the Faithful and Fallen fantasy series. All the books have been pretty equally as entertaining so far. It's sort of like one congruent story, but certainly a lot of growth with the characters. It starts out with sort of a young village boy named Corbin. There's the overarching story is two gods that basically their conflict with one another is coming to a head, and each one of the gods, sort of good god and the evil god, both have avatars, representatives in this world. Corbin ends up being that representative for the good god, and the growth in him has just been immense. It's been awesome. There's multiple points of view, multiple storylines that sort of interweave with one another. One in particular, I would say, the storyline of a character named Mackin, Maquin, Mackin, is maybe my favorite, even above Corbin's storyline. But again, I think they're all in this book. They're all going to tie together somehow. I mentioned on another YouTuber's channel the other day, I just left a comment saying that it was a review of John Gwynne's newer books, and I just mentioned in the comments that I was on this book, and somebody responded to it and said that it was their favorite book in the series, and that I'm not going to believe how it ends. So I'm pretty excited about that. I'm looking forward to reading this. That's what I have on the agenda for the beginning of November here. I'd love to hear what you guys are reading, what you plan on reading maybe for the rest of the year. If you guys have any comments on any of the 4 books that I read during the month of October, if you agree with my book of the month, maybe you disagree with it, please let me know in the comments. Until next time, you guys take care.